Good evening. This is February 25th, 2021, the meeting of the Legislative Affairs Committee. Councilors present are Councilor Zarella, Councilor Kuchar, Councilor Van Hazinga. Also present are Mr. Tom Skorowski, and myself, Beth Walsh. Also present, Tom Skorowski. Paula Karen is in here for consultation purposes, as is Mike O'Hara. Tonight we have one item on the agenda, and that is, I think it's part 2 of phase 2, bundle 3 of the zoning ordinance changes. Economic development just finished I think 3.5-hour meeting where they approved some of the proposed amendments. There were a few that they did not. I think what we would like to do at this point in time, rather than rehashing everything that they did, is to just take things section by section. And if everyone who is present here for legislative affairs who are members of the committee were also in attendance at the Economic Development Committee and are aware of all of the changes that were made there. So I think what we'd like to do is just take these section by section as Mr. Skorowski determines is appropriate. And instead of going through all of those changes, what we'll do is just ask the committee members, Legislative Affairs Committee members, to weigh in if they have a point that they do not want to approve, which was approved by Economic Development. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Tom Skorowski, and you may choose where you'd like to begin. And I think you're going to share your screen as well.
I hope I just did.
Yep.
Good evening, councilors. I feel like I just saw many of you. And thank you for sticking with us for the long haul today. So we started in our last meeting with adaptive industrial. I suppose the best way to handle this would be to just open it up and see if you all have any particular questions or recommendations that varied from the Economic Development Committee.
I will just report in economic development, we did approve all of the proposed changes.
I'm going to ask at this time if anyone has any objections to any of the proposed changes with regard to adaptive industrial.
I'm just going to wait until we finish scrolling through.
Yep.
Okay. And just a reminder, that is the functional end of where the committee voted, because they had deferred this to a discussion of the table of principal uses later.
Right.
All good.
Okay. If no one has any objections to any of the changes that were made in economic development, and I think we can do this by unanimous consent. So seeing no objections, we will pass or adopt the changes that were made and approved by economic development at their meeting.
Great.
Okay.
So second up was the commercial recreation district. This was a district to promote tourism. It includes the Game On parcels, and it includes the Great Wolf Lodge parcel. The only change here that differed from the amendments originally proposed, there was a proposed amendment to adjust the definition in the purpose statement using less flowery prose. I added a bit more flavor to it in this clause here, and supporting and complementary uses and activities, just to suggest that we might not want to be just exclusive to the uses outlined in the purpose statement. And that was approved by the Economic Development Committee. And then further down, we had a change that was proposed pertaining to the dimensions, but we actually handled that later on in a different section with the table of dimensional regulations. And I would suggest perhaps holding off on this conversation until then.
I agree. Does anyone have any objections to the other changes that were made in this section?
Nope.
All right. Then with no objection, that will pass by unanimous consent. And Mr. Skorowski, you may move on.
Okay, next up is the dimensional regulations. Let me put my glasses back on here. So there were a couple changes here that differed from those originally proposed. One of them, the Economic Development Committee had proposed basically authorizing my office to adjust the table to clarify the place of adaptive industrial within it. Currently, it's not in there because it's kind of a unique district. So it was more in concept. They had stated, make this clear when it comes to council for a full vote on March 16th, and that passed. And then further down, right, so here is the other big change that was made, that basically proposal to strike everything from 36 onward and add 50 feet. And that passed by EDC, the Economic Development Committee. And so basically how it would read then is the planning board may permit structures with a front setback of less than 15 feet and a height greater than 36. Essentially, it would remove the limit of 60 feet. Councilor Israel?
I heard the discussion on this matter, and I'm more than willing to agree that we need a higher limit. I'm not comfortable with removing the limit entirely for reasons that I've discussed previously, so I won't belabor them, but the idea that if we put no limit at all, then we are essentially authorizing a height variance by special permit process rather than by variance process. If we want to put a high limit, not so high that it's functionally non-existent, but a high limit, I would be fine with that. Or if we want to strike the height limit in the table, that would be acceptable. But allowing an unlimited waiver, I think, is dicey from a statutory standpoint.
Okay.
If you were going to put a height limit on there, Councilor Zarella, what limit would you recommend?
I would, and in that, I would defer to people such as Councillor Van Hazinga, who have more knowledge of, project specifications and so forth, to suggest something that would be high enough to accommodate any reasonable project, but not so high as to appear unlimited. I wouldn't suggest, say, maximum height of 250 feet or something, because then we're basically saying there's no limit. But
okay. A rule of thumb is about 10 to 12 feet per story. So if you kind of take it to its conclusion here with a 60-foot building, maybe that's a 5-story building. So just as a point of reference, but Councilor Van Hazinga, I don't know if you have thoughts here.
Councilor Van Hazinga, go ahead.
So I think I would disagree with Councilor Zarella a little bit about the hesitation to have an open-ended variance, or not variance, but waiver. I think that does happen in other aspects of the zoning ordinance, that the planning board does have leeway to make to waive restrictions in different areas, and they don't all have end caps or ultimate limits. So I would argue, I don't think we particularly need it. I think the planning board does have the ability to deny a special permit for something that is unreasonable, that doesn't work with the surrounding area, that would cause a problem. I don't know that we necessarily have to put a limit on. I think in terms, if there is one, the highest buildings I can think of would be the dorms at Fitchburg State. And I believe, I just drove past earlier today, and I tried to count stories real quick as I was going by. And I want to say it was around 11 stories. It was the one right at North and Pearl.
Councilor Zarella, and feel free to don't wait until I call on you. I think this is such a small group. I think we can just do this in a conversational manner, and it'll move things along. So if you
fair enough,
you would proceed.
Just wanted to defer to your authority, Madam Chair.
I appreciate that.
So I would say if the highest buildings are 11 stories ish, I'd be comfortable saying a maximum of 100 feet. which may be slightly shorter than the dorms, but we're not anticipating more of the same dorms necessarily. The reason I would say, I agree, there are other areas in the code where the planning board has an uncapped waiver ability. That's actually something I've been discussing with Solicitor Pusateri, who actually was the first one who flagged this for me. And that is something we may be circling back to in the next few months, to put caps on all of those. Again, not as a limit on planning board power, but for the purpose of ensuring that from a legal interpretation standpoint, it is in fact a waiver and not a variance. In most cases, it won't matter, but if someone were ever to, if an abutter were ever to challenge a determination of the planning board on something like that, they could point to the statute, the portion of 40A that authorizes variances, and say this procedure was not complied with, but it was functionally a variance. So it's more actually to strengthen the planning board's decisions and make sure that they're insulated against appeal. Which is why I said, you know, I'm okay with any high limit as long as it's a functional limit. But yeah, so I would make a motion that we reinsert a limit, but make it 100 feet.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
And are there any objections to that motion? All right, seeing none, that'll pass by unanimous consent.
And that's the only area that differed from the original recommendations as proposed.
Okay, so with the exception of that one change that we just approved,
I'm sorry to interrupt, Madam Chair, but I will say that I think there was a change within the zoning table too. Or I'm sorry, not the zoning table, the dimensional table.
Oh, correct.
Commercial and commercial recreation, the limit was raised to 50 feet.
Correct. Thank
you are correct. Okay. So that would be the only other change that we would need to approve in legislative affairs, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
One thing that's just worth noting, actually, I guess everybody, if you were listening originally, RC non-single family that was a typo, but you all had already voted on that.
Correct.
About a month back.
Right.
Just to clarify.
Okay.
Motion to approve as amended.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. And seeing no objections, that will pass by unanimous consent.
Okay. Up next, we have the use table. Okay. So I think the first item for debate here, there was a consideration posed related to artist live workspace that we might want to add an exception or clarity that this definition does not include adult entertainment. There's a discussion had essentially that there are more restrictive definitions within our ordinance for sexually explicit uses. And accordingly, the Economic Development Committee didn't feel the need to clarify further.
So on that point, the reason I felt it was important to clarify further is because our definitions for adult uses in our adult use line of the table, I did look into the various categories that we have defined. They only include uses that have customers, essentially.
Okay.
So, for instance, you could have an adult film studio under our current definition of artist live workspace, provided that it doesn't have any clientele coming in to view the recording. And I think it may be true that such a use may or may not even be obtrusive to neighbors. I don't know, but I think it's something that I would rather err on the side of caution, given that we are allowing this use in several residential areas. I think also, I remember there was a point raised during economic development regarding bona fide artistic nude modeling. That would not be affected by the proposed change, because we do have a definition for a nude modeling studio that includes only uses where genitalia are displayed prominently and so forth, as opposed to the sort of artistic nudes where it's,
Right.
And your motion is simply
and
to
also an
clarify the
artist
language.
studio.
Oh, sorry. No, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I was just going to say. I'll wait.
What I was going to say is your motion is basically to just clarify the language and not a specific clarification of the language.
Right, to clarify it, to ensure that in addition to the already defined adult uses, we are also excluding any, let's say, adult material production that might otherwise fall within the definition. And this would apply to artist live workspace and artist studio further down.
Okay. So would this just be an addition to the definition that wouldn't necessarily be nested here? It would just be a new definition in our definitions.
Correct. I only mentioned it here because this is the only place in the documentation that the definition appears.
Okay. That clarification makes sense in my book. And we, if authorized, we could make that and have it ready for the March 16th hearing.
Okay.
Excellent. That is my motion then.
All right. Do I have a second?
I'll
Second. Okay. That motion is seconded. Are there any objections to that amendment? Seeing none, I will pass by unanimous consent. All right. Mr. Skorowski.
I want to just note that here. Okay, going further.
Before we scroll off that page, there was the multifamily and RB issue.
Oh, thank you. So it was proposed as an amendment, changed to N, and then it was kept at PB by the Economic Development Committee.
Right. So, and I understand the rationale for that. I don't feel incredibly strongly about it, but speaking from experience on the zoning board, what I see in RB a lot, because of the nature of the properties that tend to exist in RB, is that the planning board has oversight over new multifamily uses under the current table, but reinstatements of properties that have lost their grandfathering goes to zoning. And what we see a lot of the time is people saying, you've got a large, whether it's a tenement or a manor house type structure or something, and they say, well, look, we've got this real estate listing from 15 years ago that says it used to be a 5-family or something like that.
Right.
And they want it reinstated. And because a special permit is inherently a permissive grant, we then have to find some actual reason to say no to that, even though our real reason is often it is wildly inappropriate for this location. But we've got to find something specific to tack onto it to say, within the criteria. Okay. So it's a big problem. We get these predatory, like fly-by-night developers coming in occasionally. And sometimes it passes from one predatory developer to another as they trade it on without telling people that they got an adverse decision from the zoning board.
Okay. And we've certainly seen that in our nice problem property task force. And
I think you know the exact one I mean.
I know the exact one you mean, and the argument's not without merit. I think one suggestion I might make is with the new multifamily development ordinance, a lot of those would not comply under the density provision and would therefore they would need a variance from the ZBA anyway.
The only catch there is that again, if they're coming in as formerly grandfathered
Correct.
properties and asking for a reinstatement,
Mhm.
that gets them around a lot of the base requirements.
Understood. Yeah.
Those base requirements can give a basis for turning down the special permit. But I guess my thought here is that I'd like to send a strong signal to such developers that this is just not a thing we're going to allow in the
I
future.
think the problem with this is that you're trying to close one loophole for properties that shouldn't be developed like this, but you're also closing the door on developments that would make sense, that are good developments.
Hmm.
So you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater just to get rid of the bathwater. And is that an acceptable method? Just because it is a problem in some areas, you're preventing it where it may not be a problem.
Mhm.
And
I
I guess
would-
too, if you can do it by finding, you would have to find a reason to turn them down, then I think then you would be able to do that by finding a reason to turn them down.
And I think even if this is a not allowed use currently with the planning board, if they're trying to reinstate, isn't that still the argument? That doesn't change.
Yeah, it can be. We've had people make that argument. I guess maybe what we could do, and this is outside the scope of the table, but maybe something we can look at in the next month or so, is simply state that any multifamily development must be applied for as a new project. No reinstatements of lapsed grandfathering for multifamily developments. That would maybe clear the issue entirely.
And I think that would be a more targeted response to the problem.
All right, I will make no motion to change what the economic development has done here.
Okay. And I think I don't think that there were any other changes that were not approved. Were there, or were there?
There was one, actually, there were a couple additions that were unrelated to the original amendments proposed. So one important one was with commercial recreation. It was proposed to be stricken from the rural residential district. And then the motion did not pass. It was 2-2.
Yeah.
So ultimately it reverted back to what it is today, which is N.
I would actually suggest changing that to PB. I know that conceptually speaking, the rural residential is a more rural than RA, but practically speaking, rural residential has a lot of space, whereas RA may be low density occupant wise, but it's high density lot wise. So there's not really room for a lot of latitude in RA.
A greater likelihood for conflict, basically.
What's that?
A greater likelihood for conflict with the butters and what have you.
Exactly. Whereas in rural residential, if we do it by special permit, we've still got that layer of review so that people aren't plunking something in the middle of a residential neighborhood of houses on 1 acre or whatever.
Right.
But if they've got a property that's 6 acres far away from any current houses or anything, why not? I mean, if it's been sitting vacant this long, there's probably not someone who wants to use it for residential. So I would make a motion that we change that to PB as initially recommended.
And I'll second that for just, I already made my statements in the last committee.
Right. And I agreed with those statements. So I'm in favor of that. Unless Mr. Kuchar signals to me that he's opposed, we're going to go ahead and change that by unanimous consent. Thank you very much. There was a question in economic development about line 25, wireless communications facility, and
Mhm.
why those were all asterisks. And Tom, I believe you said something about referring to 181.62.
Correct, and that's what's referenced here in the small writing. Are you requesting a journey to 181.62 of the zoning?
Is that something that you think that we should address this evening? Would it be appropriate to address that now?
I mean, it's basically just calling out that there's a very unique process that pertains to wireless communications facilities that and Mike O'Hara, you could jump in here to correct me where needed, but it's not appropriate to put in a use table because it's really almost a case by case basis type of thing, and
Okay.
it is less likely that we are to be even allowed to say no to many of these uses. So it's more about given that this is somewhat of an exempt use, we have limited oversight capability, but 181.62 outlines that oversight capability.
Okay, so would it be fair to say that we're leaving it in the table because people would look to the table to find that, and then when they find the asterisk, they would then refer back to 181.62?
Right, which lays out the special permit thresholds and all
Okay.
of that.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
All right. And I don't know if is there anything else of note that you would want to discuss? I know there was a couple of definitions, but I think those were not met with any objection.
There
Right.
were a few table lines further up that I had wanted to touch on briefly, starting with D12.
Okay.
Motor vehicle repair and body shop.
Yep, I think you may be paused, Tom.
Oh, okay, great, thanks. All right, here we are.
Yep.
So
Yep.
we had went from N to BA. Actually, correction, that was a planning board recommendation. So anyway,
Yep,
I'll
that's
give it to you, Counselor.
the change was in the downtown business district. And it was an N and then got changed back to BA
Correct.
because there are a couple existing uses of that type.
Mhm.
I think it should stay an N. I don't think pre-existing uses should determine our zoning. We should just allow them to be grandfathered. I think that in general, given the sharp contraction of the downtown district that we've done from the previous CBD, I think it's no longer appropriate to have motor vehicle repair shops as an allowed use in that area. In general, that would be disruptive to the pedestrian-oriented environment that we're trying to cultivate down there.
And are you making a motion to leave that as BA and not make the change?
No, to revert it back to N.
To revert it back to BA.
No, to N.
To N, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Do I have a second? Or comments?
It's presently in the table right now, since we don't have, it's a central business district, it's BA, just to make it clear what the basis is.
Yes, I believe the initial recommendation was to change it to N, and then the Economic Development Committee decided to change it back to BA. So I'm making a motion that we change it to N as originally recommended.
And I guess I'll second the motion. And am I seeing Councilor Van Hazinga, you look like you have an objection on your face.
I'm staring intently at the zoning map and thinking about the parcels that are there. And
Okay.
the parcel that does come to mind is the former Martori's Tire, which I believe, is it still being used by the Money Tech as a burning facility?
It actually just went up for sale. I think it was purchased
Yeah.
within the past few months. So
Okay.
I don't believe it's used by Monty Tech anymore. But
Okay.
It's in redevelopment.
So is it going to stay a automotive repair use, or what is the intention there?
I guess it would depend on the vote that takes place here. I'm not quite sure if there's and Mike or Mary Jo, feel free to jump in if I'm wrong here, but I'm not sure if there's a new proposed use there yet.
I haven't heard of one or seen a form of intent.
And it could certainly stay automotive repair as long as it doesn't abandon that use for 2 years.
To 2 years, yeah.
Right.
So if someone has interest in moving in and continuing its current use, that would be perfectly fine, even if we change it to an N.
That's a good point.
Plus, it is also not a residential district, so use variances are available in exceptional cases.
Okay, and so I think that's a spot that still works for automotive repair if that were to continue long term. I think at the other end of the downtown business district, there is adjacent to Amniot Field, there's an auto body shop. Is it LeBlanc?
Yes.
That's right. That's right.
And it's tucked in behind the Dunkin' Donuts. It's unobtrusive. I have absolutely no problem with that continuing its current use. So I guess just the question in my mind is that elsewhere that I'm looking, that it is right. Downtown probably isn't the best place for these kinds of uses. It would be better in a commercial district. But do you hold the whole district hostage for 2 properties at the edges that can legally continue? There is the avenue for the Board of Appeals. Yeah, okay, I'm fine. I have no objection.
Okay. So the motion is to make that read not BA, but read N. Okay. And let's see, Councillor Kuchar, I don't see any objection, so I'm going to go ahead. That'll pass by unanimous consent.
All right, and then 16B. I believe I'm trying to see what the change was. I didn't mark all the changes in my.
Well, and actually on my chart, I can't see the one on my screen. There are 2 16Bs.
That's correct. And that was
Yeah.
actually a change we just typographically needed to make.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
one thing, 2 things. So Councillor Zarella had proposed, Councillor Van Hazinga on behalf of Zarella had proposed that we change N to PB for artisan manufacturing over 7,500 square feet in the commercial recreation district. And that vote, I don't believe passed.
I don't believe that's correct.
It did pass?
No, I don't think that was proposed.
It was artisan manufacturing up to 7,500 that I had suggested should be PB.
Correct.
It looks like actually that might have just been typographical because I don't think anyone actually recommended that 15B be changed to PB. It was 15A and 16A, but it looks like 15B got shifted. I could be wrong. I wasn't keeping notes on what exactly got changed.
The discussion was not under commercial recreation. We did make it, I believe we did make a change, but it was under DB. I think it does, like the change didn't show up on the document, but I thought it was to make consistent over 7,500 square feet for both was planning board approved.
So that took place here in the commercial district.
On the commercial, okay.
To maintain
Commercial,
consistency.
right.
Here, this decision to have in the commercial recreation district a artisan food and beverage over 7,500 square feet, that was actually made in planning board. And then Councillor Zarella had proposed that artisan manufacturing up to 7,500 gross floor area be added. And I quite honestly can't recall where the Economic Development Committee landed on this one.
So I believe it was approved. My issue is that I took my notes in the wrong spot. My notes for that were back in the commercial recreation discussion, not the table of use discussion. So yes, that is correct.
I think if you look at the chat, Commissioner Squalia had a clarification or or noted exactly what happened?
All right.
Yes, I think she was referring to the change that we just talked about in the commercial. But so we did approve the change to planning board, but we did it in commercial recreation, not in the table of use discussion. So it may not have gotten carried over to this area.
Yeah, I think the way you've got it currently, Tom, is I think reflects all the changes that have been made.
Okay.
All right.
And
let
then
me-
it was actually higher up. There was the nursing home thing. I just wanted to touch on that very, very briefly. I don't feel too strongly about it, but the reasoning for my proposal that we scratch it in RA but not in RR is really the same as the rationale for the commercial recreation, which is that RR has enough space that you can site a high traffic facility away from residential, from traditional residential uses, whereas RA really does not. So a nursing home with high traffic and potentially high parking needs is not really, I can't think of why we would want to permit it in the RA district. But then again, I do recall having that discussion with Councillor Van Hazinga the other day, and I don't remember if we had reached a contrary resolution on that.
I think our discussion, we both sort of understood the arguments. I don't know that we came to a definitive decision.
Okay.
I will say you can make this, so the nursing home would still be allowed in RSB and RC. And you make a similar argument that there is more space to allow for this sort of development, much like there's more space in RR.
Precisely. RA, just to my mind, RA is our most traditional neighborhood district, really. Your typical front yard picket fence kind of district, I feel like, is what we're aiming for in RA, which is why I've recommended that so many uses be changed to in RA as we're going through all this. But again, with nursing homes, it's not something where I think we have an epidemic of people trying to cram nursing homes into suburban neighborhoods. So
it is also something that's a heavily regulated industry. Would have to go for planning board approval. There are many state approvals that it would have to get. It would have to get Medicare certified or Medicaid. So there's a lot that goes into it, and there's actually a moratorium on the development of new nursing homes in the state of Massachusetts as it is. The state will not approve new nursing homes as an effort to control an oversupply of beds. And this may change at some time as our demographics of society ages.
Right.
But for the foreseeable future, the state will just not allow new beds.
makes sense. All right.
So leave that as is.
Yeah, I'll leave as
Okay.
is. I'm fine with
All
that. Only two other things in the table. One is just a comment. Well, really, they're both two comments and one substantive change. One is just, I was looking at the 13 and 13A sections, and I remember there had been some discussion about, well, we want to permit, this is D13, we want to permit it in neighborhood business because we don't want to restrict car washes attached to gas stations and so forth. It occurs to me, though this may be outside the scope of what we're dealing with tonight, that it may make more sense to attach car washes to 13A rather than 13, because it seems like a motor vehicle service station is a more disruptive use than, say, a gas station with a car wash or something. So we may want to permit car washes wherever we're permitting gas stations, but not necessarily permit service stations wherever we're permitting gas stations or car washes.
Well,
but that's just a thought.
And typically when they're together, you have a car wash with a gas station. Can't think of any car washes that are cited with a repair.
Right.
Right.
So that's maybe not something we deal with tonight because it's a more substantive change and would probably require some edits to the definitions, but it's something I'd like to touch on in the next month or so, maybe after we've concluded the actual phase 2. The other thing, no, that's not really relevant, I guess. The last thing is in the very last section F, I believe it is, of the principal use table. If you could scroll there, Tom.
Hmm.
And I think you're paused again.
Oh, apologies.
No problem. Open air storage of junk, F2. I think I mentioned this early on in the advisory committee meeting, but I think this might be the appropriate time to address it. The whole except an approved except that the zoning board of appeals may issue a special permit for the storage of bona fide antique vehicles, blah, blah, blah. I think we really need to pull that out of the table and make it an independent provision because it's not part of the definition of the use. It's a substantive exception that the zoning board may grant, and no one's going to look at the table for that. No one's going to look and say, I want to do an antique car storage. You know, let me look under open air storage of junk and see what it says.
Kind of like a hidden footnote.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think everything from the second except on,
The second,
no, that's the first except. Yeah, everything from the second except on, I think needs to be taken out and made into its own provision in some appropriate location. I don't really have a strong feeling as to where, but
well, the way it's currently written, it would be what allowed by the ZBA in anywhere.
it does seem like it says anywhere. I mean, that may be something we want to address, make it its own independent use, antique car storage, and put it in as a separate line. But
I think we could probably all agree it's not something we'd want to see in residential neighborhoods.
I would agree. Although then again, it does say not visible from abutting properties or public ways. So it could apply to someone in rural residential who has a large garage or something and stores their 3 or 4 antique cars that they bring out to civic days or something.
But would that qualify as a principal use?
Good point. That would be an accessory use.
And it's open air versus, it was open air versus being inside storage. So that's
Right.
I'm talking outside storage. And don't
Yeah.
put things outside, all kinds of abandoned vehicles need to have like plates and things too.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the only reason we might want to make it its own use if we want to permit it at all through the zoning board is just because a use that is not a permitted use can't be an accessory use either. We have a presumption in our ordinance that if something is not included in the table of uses, then it's simply prohibited everywhere in the city. So I think we need to create a separate provision and then insert a row into the table. But I think it would be simple enough to just say either BA across the board or BA in everything except residential districts.
I think the latter is probably the most reasonable considering.
Mhm.
So the BA is going to apply to the current line or the added line?
The added line, the current
added
line will
line.
still be an
Okay.
N across the board.
All right. All right, that makes sense. Does anyone have an objection to that change? Okay,
All right.
seeing none, I think I'm going to take that as a motion and seeing as there's no objection, I think we'll just pass it by unanimous consent.
And that is all the comments I have on the table.
Okay. And I think I could entertain a motion to just accept everything that was approved, other than the ones that we have taken up, approve everything else that was passed by economic development.
So moved.
All right. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. All right.
Oh, and that is
and-
also, I should have mentioned this sooner, but it doesn't affect the vote we just took. We were going to change did the economic development address the change from DBD and NBD?
They did.
to,
And they,
Okay,
they
excellent.
approved it.
I just didn't catch that. But cool.
Okay.
And I think, are we at the map?
I believe so. And I'm going to have to ask you all to remind me when we're done with the map. We have one very simple pro forma vote that we need to take that economic development didn't take. It will take 10 seconds. And I don't think it's a big deal that they didn't. But somebody should vote on it. Okay, so.
You want to do that now before we forget?
Well, you're
I think-
voting on new districts, technically. You wouldn't want to get rid of the old ones before you vote on these ones, but, well, you could vote on it subject to passage.
Aren't all the ones that you're removing just the overlays anyway, though? So even if we
Yeah.
remove them and don't replace them, they'll still be the underlying zoning?
Okay, I've been swayed.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Let's do it. Am I paused still? Okay. So this is just a vote to remove the overlay districts. The mill conversion overlay, where a
Yes.
bunch of, you guys heard the presentation before. Municipal parking overlay district removes parking requirements in the downtown, but now our downtown is its own district that has no parking requirements for commercial and residential up to 6 units. The student housing overlay district has functionally, it's useless. And it really has no use. West Fitchburg corridor overlay provided a lot of flexibility for West Fitchburg properties, but now we're going to be doing that with our zoning changes. And then the Westminster Hill Road Commercial Recreation Overlay District, that's the overlay over Game On. If the committee were to approve the commercial recreation designation for Game On, this would then be obsolete.
Just a quick question on the student housing overlay. We did actually approve 1 or 2 developments under that.
You did, correct. 75 day, I think, and
Yes.
45 snow.
And so what's worth noting is one of those two is no longer it was taken over by the university.
Snow.
And if you were to talk to anyone in the university today, they would tell you that we have a glut of student housing. And there isn't sort of a functional need to approve any others. What I also would say is if there were a need, we could approve it through existing provisions of our zoning. We don't necessarily need a standalone for it.
Okay, my only thought is that, so the property at 75 Day, is that still operating as student housing?
As far as I know, yeah. I'm not sure about the occupancy level though. Whenever
I
you go by,
know-
not too many cars there.
I know well, it's a little different this year too.
Well, even before.
But there are added requirements with that overlay. How would it affect? I know it can still continue to operate, but
The
would we
conditions
lose-
of the conditions of the permit would still apply.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Mhm.
No problem.
All right. Do I have a motion to approve the
motion.
deletion of those districts?
So moved.
Okay, and do
Second.
I have a second? Okay. All right, and seeing no objection, we'll pass by unanimous consent.
Okay.
And onto the map.
Onto the map. And here is the map. Some key changes that were made. You guys saw all of them, so I won't
Yes.
belabor the point. Adding this to the MBD, proposing to change this to residential, which it's just half of a parcel. The other parcel is residential to begin with. I'm looking
Just
for-
at that section, Tom, it shows the RA written like behind where Kentucky Fried Chicken used to be, or Popeyes or whatever it was.
Yep.
But I don't think, did you do a box there?
Oh, here. Right.
I just don't want it to get lost in the shuffle.
I'll remind him.
Thanks.
Good catch, Andy.
All right, and I would never forget something like that. All right, so then we also had a couple parcels here that the planning board had actually voted to make these PB or RB. Sorry, and I don't know why the thing didn't carry over. I should probably clarify this. Okay, I see. So if you look without the zoning, these are residential parcels that are kind of bifurcated.
Right.
So this would just clarify that.
So the only change that I noted, and only because it happens to be literally a 30-second walk from me, is at the very corner of South Street and St. Paul. You've got that NBD there near Romano's.
Oh, so
Right there, yeah.
not proposed, but what the planning board had proposed.
Right, and it extends one lot too far to the corner, to the northern corner. That is a residential lot. That's one of my neighbors.
Oh, okay.
That's all.
That's constituent services at work here, guys.
Absolutely, you know it.
Well, for that matter, is the lot just to the south also residential, or is that owned by Romano's?
That's a good question. I think
Romano
that
owns a
they're,
house
Yeah, it's
next
with the
door.
greenhouse.
yeah, I think that is attached to Romano's. That's as you drive up Romano Ave. That's part of the greenhouse and offices.
Okay. Hey, Tom, I thought opposite on the other side of the street, Colley's. See the other parcel to the south that has greenhouses? That's also owned by Colley's.
Oh, good catch.
Nope. Next one down. Next one over.
Oh, this
That's
one.
yeah.
That's a good catch, Mike.
Yeah, there
Well,
you go.
Provided that the committee agrees.
Up to you folks, but part of the greenhouses extend over to that parcel.
I will add it as a proposal. I will delete it if you all disagree.
I think that
I'm
makes
good with
sense.
that.
Yep.
Okay.
And where did we have 619 south is, I think, directly south of there, in there, one of those three parcels, I think, unless I'm mistaken. Or is it just past Colley's? I used to walk all the time along there, but I'm drawing a blank.
No, further north, Don.
619.
Yeah, it's right near the NBD that we were just discussing. It's either one of those three parcels, or
it must be
Right up by
619. It must be
Fontaine?
up further.
okay, yeah, because that is currently, I believe, a speech therapist and
Yeah, that's Paul
real
Fontaine's
estate.
former building.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was included. I
Correct.
just was thinking about the area. Okay, that's all I've got.
Okay.
And are there any other suggested changes from what economic development approved? Okay. Seeing none, I think, are we in agreement that we'll approve what was changed by economic development and the minor notations that have been made right now?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. All right, seeing no objections, that passes by unanimous consent. And I believe that is all we have left, correct?
That's correct. So on Tuesday, the council will vote on bundle 2. On the 16th of March, the council will vote on everything we talked about here, which means on March 2nd, all of the updated materials will be available for review. And that will be noted and sort of submitted with the council at the meeting on Tuesday. So that's it,
Okay.
folks. Thank you so much for sticking around.
All right,
Thank
I want to
you.
thank everybody,
Tom.
Mr. O'Hara, Ms. Karen. I know that Councilor Squally has stuck with us for most of the evening as well. So thank you very much, Mary Jo Bohart. Tom, again, we were commenting before you came on. We don't know how you do it, but we're certainly glad that you do. So thank you to everybody on Legislative Affairs, Anthony and Andy. I appreciate you pitching in last night. I was a little under the weather, and I'm feeling much better today. So thank you very much.
Very
And,
glad to hear it.
And Andrew, thank you for sticking with us. I know it's been a long evening, and so thanks everybody, and we'll see you Tuesday.
All right, motion for dinner.
Yeah, I guess we need a motion to
Second.
adjourn. All right, so moved, and it is unanimous consent, and we'll see you Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everyone.
See you
Okay,
bright
good
and
night.
early tomorrow.